All right, guys, this is Adirondack Adventures, and today we're going to talk about layers. All right, so a layering system. What is it? How do you use it? This video is a long time coming. This is meant as a companion video to my top 10 essential winter gear video I made several years ago. And as we enter the shoulder season, it's important to consider our layering system. So I think of my layering system as my personal thermostat. So the idea is to add or shed layers as weather conditions change. In any given day, you may experience a multitude of weather conditions where it may start very cool and throughout the day get very warm, or vice versa. So when I think about my layering system and having it function properly, what I'm actually thinking about is what is the multitude of weather conditions I expect to experience, and what are the best garments to select in order to remain comfortably cool over that period of time. Yes, weather conditions are sometimes unexpected, and that's something that needs to be discussed also. So your layering system should be well thought out with the weather conditions that you expect, also some overlap into conditions that you may experience. What I'm talking about is sometimes I'll look at the weather and it looks like it's going to be a perfectly dry day, and what happens, you get out there and there's showers that move through, and it may only be 10 or 15 minutes, but those 10 or 15 minutes meant that you got really wet. And really wet sometimes means really cold, and really cold can sometimes be a life and death situation. So preventing that is what your layering system does. So what are the spectrums of weather or gradients specifically? Well, in the Adirondacks and everywhere else for that matter, temperature comes to mind right off the bat. Like I said, it may begin the day very cold, and throughout the day it may get to 70, 80 degrees. In the fall, that's very common, where it may be freezing at 7 a.m., but by 4 p.m. it's 78 degrees and very hot. That's the Adirondack Mountains. Vice versa happens all the time as well. So temperature, the next one to consider is obviously precipitation. When things are dry, the clothes you're wearing are different than when things are wet. Wind is an important aspect to consider also. Wind when it's warm is very different than wind when it's cold, and wind when you're wet is much different than wind when you're dry. So wind, temperature, and wetness or dryness are those three things are the most important things to consider when you're picking pieces or different items for your layering system. So let's talk about what a layering system, what the components of a layering system actually are. And in my mind, I think of it as three different parts. You have your base or wicking layer. You have your mid or insulative layer, and you have your outer or protective layer is how I think about it. Let's start with the base layer. This layer is the layer that touches your skin. It has to be comfortable, but more importantly, it has to breathe and wick moisture away from your skin, because if it traps moisture under that layer, then precipitation is the least of your worries, because you have precipitation under your clothes already, and it's in the form of sweat. So sweat regulation, and if you're sweating, you're doing it wrong right off the bat, I'll say. Try to adjust your layering system. If you begin sweating, try to adjust your layering system right away. Because like I said, it's about not sweating is the proper way to use your layering system. And you have to use your layering system. You could have all the pieces in your backpack, but if you don't know when to use them or use them properly, then they're useless. So that's another component. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Back to the base layer, it has to wick moisture. You will perspire. You'll get to that point where it may be just 1 minute, 2 minutes, but you'll start to feel yourself getting too warm, and then at that point you'll shed a layer. But if you have breathability and you have a wicking layer at your skin, it'll remove that sweat very quickly off your skin. It'll evaporate very quickly. The second component of my layering system is my mid or insulative layer. The most important aspects of this layer is providing warmth, right, when you need it, and removing that when you don't need it. So the layers that give you a little bit more warmth, removing the layers when you need to cool off very quickly. This layer also, I love hoods on my pieces of clothing in that, because a hood allows you to regulate your temperature even more specifically, where even 2 or 3 degrees, you might start hiking, you warm up, you take your hood off, you cool off just enough. The third component of the layering system is the protective, or basically rain and water layer, the waterproof layer, because if things get wet in the atmosphere, it comes down, you need to keep that moisture off your clothes. If you get cold from the moisture in your clothes, or your clothes are soaking wet and they won't dry, as I mentioned, that's a life and death situation. So you need to have a protective outer layer when things, and it may not even be raining, it may be coming off the trees. A lot of times late in the winter, it'll be maybe 25 degrees, the air temperature, but the sun has been hitting that snow in the trees all day long, and they're wet. It's starting to melt slightly because it's been in the sun, and you'll brush up against it. If you get that on your clothes just from brushing up against a tree, it's the same as a rain event or perspiring too much. So knowing when to wear your protective layer, I'll talk about the protective layers that I have, the ones that I select the most, and why I select them. So let's go through some of my specific clothing items. We'll start with warm conditions and we'll move our way to cold conditions. And I'll show you some of the layers and features of my clothing that I use in order to keep my temperature at a point where I'm comfortable all day long. All right, so let's just quickly go through pretty much most of my layers. And I have a couple backups that occasionally I'll do a different activity in. Yeah, sometimes for skiing or something like that, I'll switch out some of these different things. But this is basically everything that I will consider. And we're gonna start with kind of like warmer, drier conditions and work our way down. But basically here in the front, I just have basically, things are nice and warm, and I'm doing basically anything from paddling to mountain biking to hiking, I usually just wear like a nylon short, right? And as things cool down, I move up to a nylon track pant, and I'll show you these things a little bit, the features on these pants that make it easy for me to put them on and off when I need to, take them off and on frequently, and it's not a hassle. They pack up very easily. As things get colder, I have more of a mid-weight fleece polyester layer that I wear on my legs. And as things even get colder, I wear a heavy polyester track pant. I like athletic gear for the things that I do. And I tend to gravitate towards companies that have learned that mixing athletic gear with performance hiking gear is what we want. As people that spend time outdoors, we want basically clothes that perform. So yeah, we want them to look like we're going outdoors, but we also want them to perform, and we want them with athletic fits because we're doing athletic things. A dry fit short sleeve shirt is very common. I have a multitude of colors, and colors are an important thing to consider with your layers, because the difference between a white shirt and a black shirt in the summertime is drastic. In the fall, when things are sunny and they may be around 50 degrees, I will consider wearing a black shirt because that'll keep me slightly warmer, or it'll be a feature of my layering system that actually functions and allows me to regulate my temperature even more specifically, because if a black shirt at 50 degrees is better than a white shirt, then that's part of my layering system, right? So it's a tool, as I mentioned, and you have to use it properly. When things get colder, I have a 3/4 zip Capeline shirt. I'll show you what that looks like. This is a long sleeve polyester stretch dry fit shirt. It's a Northface. It's like the hyper dry shirt or flash dry shirt. This is a very similar shirt made of a very similar material. It has thumb holes and a hood, a very nice hood, which makes it a nice feature that goes into my layering system. We'll talk about that. And if things are a little colder and I need to beef up my layering system, I love this polyester mid-weight layer in my mid-layer section. Not against my skin. I'll talk about why. Really, it's easy to say. It's the breathability. This layer does not breathe or wick as well as some of these other layers. And this is my base layer right now, which is a very stretch base layer, which is a polyester nylon with maybe some spandex in it. I like layers that stretch. I like them to fit really well. Moving down to colder conditions, as I mentioned, now still in my mid layer, I have this Deviator hoodie. I'll show you this. It's a really sweet piece from OR, and it does a lot of things. It has a very nice hood. It is water resistant. It's exceptionally warm for how much it weighs, and that's one of the reasons I love it. To add a little bit more beef, I have an Outdoor Research puffy or hoodie. It is the Transcendent down hoodie. I love this. Both of the hoods on both of those pieces are really good, and I consider those some of my favorite pieces in my layering system. This is the REI Gortex. This is a wind jacket, and it is exceptionally warm and cuts the wind. Many times I summit mountains at 5, 6, 7, 8 degrees, and this is the layer I will have on the top in very dry conditions. It's exceptionally warm and keeps the wind out really well. This right here is my rain gear, and I will say this is my predominant outer protective layer. I'll talk about why I use a raincoat over these. I have a very nice Outdoor Research shell right here. I ski in this jacket, and I have a more insulated REI windproof, waterproof jacket. I'll show you that, the red one underneath there. But I'll tell you, I use my $35 Cabela's raincoat all the time, because what that allows me to do is just get the protective feature of my outer layer without the bulk and the extra warmth. There's many times you don't need the extra warmth. You have the extra warmth here and all these other layers, and this layer you just want to keep you dry. So I'll tell you, I use my raincoat even in the winter. You'll see me in winter hikes wearing that, because I'm getting all my other warmth right here. And to carry all the warmth in that jacket is just too much. Sometimes it's just too warm, and all I want is the water protective factor, but that jacket in all its insulative capacity keeps me too warm, so it doesn't allow me to regulate my temperature as well. That's why I use that raincoat. All right, now let's look at the specific layers that I use. I'm going to talk about the characteristics of the layers. I have compiled my layering system over decades. Some of these pieces are they could be 10, 15, 16 years old, maybe even older. They still function great. I don't even remember their names many times. There are two brands that I tend to gravitate towards, I want to be honest, and it is Outdoor Research and Northface. I love Northface base layers. I love their mid layers. A lot of times they fit my body very well, and what I can do is I find layers that fit together perfect so that I'm always comfortable and it doesn't feel like it's cumbersome, especially when I'm wearing my backpack, because as you start to build these layers on top of each other, it could feel cumbersome if you're doing it in the wrong way, or they feel too bulky, or they're not the right size. So having them fit and knowing where, when you buy a piece at a store, where that may go in your system. How is it middle? Is it right next to my skin? Is it closer to where my protective outer layer may be? Think about where it may be in the sandwich so that you start to fill out your sandwich. There are certain materials that you need to avoid if you're going to be outdoors, and cotton is a killer, as they say. You don't wear cotton clothes when you're outdoors, because what happens when they get wet, it takes forever for them to dry So they're basically useless. You have to err on the side of staying dry. Dry equals warm. So you need dry fit clothes, synthetic materials, clothes that will dry quickly. Every time I start to plan a trip and I begin considering the components or the apparel pieces that I'm gonna bring for the given recreational activity that I'm planning, I think of basically scenarios, right? And as I mentioned earlier, the spectrums or gradients of weather conditions that I expect to see play into those scenarios. So I may be thinking about a dry, warm day. I may be thinking about a cool, dry day or a cold, dry day. That's different than a warm, dry day or a warm, wet day. All those scenarios, and then you factor in wind as well, because wind will play a role with the actual temperature that you feel. So all those things I start to think about having protection from wind, protection from moisture, keeping me warm enough, and having the pieces varied enough so that I can switch them up and get the right complexion to keep my temperature right where I need it, which is going to vary. There may be an uphill component. You may be descending. As you descend, you're exerting less energy. You may be coming down a different direction. The wind direction may shift throughout the day, and having the piece available, put it on, keep your body temperature perfect so that you do not perspire. This is a good example of what I like to do a lot, is that two pieces that perform very similar. They're both really good. They both breathe very well. They both wick moisture very well. They both dry very quickly. These are both Northface. They're both hyper flash dry kind of layers. They are a synthetic layer. The hood allows me to fluctuate very easily. I can adjust, adapt. When there's wind blowing down my neck, I can put my hood up. When things are warmer, I'm starting to feel like I'm getting warmer, take my hood down, remove a layer very quickly. And I can show you very quickly how this comes off. So as I start to warm up, I will remove a layer. They basically weigh nothing. You can roll them up into basically nothing. They go back in your pack. You look in your pack, it's a different color. Each layer is a different color. You know what you're grabbing. You take it out. You know exactly how to mix and match, because the color distinguishes the functionality of the apparel. I really also like this 3/4 zip Capilene top. It has thumb straps. It's so lightweight and thin. I sometimes go straight to skin with this shirt. It gives you the ability just to warm yourself up, dial this in. A lot of times in the summer on summits, this will be the layer I grab first, because you don't want a lot of insulative capacity, but you want some protection from the sun and wind. And this breathes really well, so as you get to the top and you're sweating a little bit, this will allow the sweat to remove from your skin while protecting you from the sun. So 3/4 zip just gives you that extra functionality. This one doesn't have a hood, so having pieces that have different functionality. 3/4 zip, full zip, hooded pieces, long sleeve pieces, short sleeve pieces. You know, in the shoulder seasons, the winter months, and as you gain elevation in the Adirondacks and you need to add layers, the more heavyweight mid layers that I like, I'll show you now. This is one of my favorites. This I mentioned earlier was the OR Deviator hoodie. And this jacket is extremely warm for what you get out of it. And I mentioned earlier that Outdoor Research is one of my favorite brands because it fits my body very well, right? I really love the hood on this jacket. I have another Deviator hoodie as well that I ski in, and it goes right underneath my ski helmet. They're designed for rock climbing, mountain biking, doing things that are very athletic. This jacket is great. As I mentioned, it's extremely warm. It's not a waterproof layer, but it is water resistant. So this is one of my layers that I go to in very dry conditions. It's sometimes the layer closer to my outer protective layer. It may be the last layer before I put my raincoat on, or my shell, depending upon exactly what the conditions may be. When things get a little bit windier or colder, my next layer I go to is, this is an REI Gortex, and this is basically what you call a wind fleece or windbreaker layer, and it fits perfectly over the top of my Deviator, so I could have multiple layers now. You can imagine I could have a base layer, several insulative layers underneath this Deviator. Then I go with this wind-breaking layer. This layer is exceptionally water resistant as well. It has an awesome hood that I can cinch down when things start to get a little bit nastier, the wind picks up. If things are a little bit colder and I need to bulk up a little bit more, that's when I might grab my puffy down coat, and let me see, like a Russian doll, this one fits very nicely over this layer. So now I have 3 incredibly insulative layers on right here, and you can see it's not bulky at all. With a backpack, it fits very nicely, and this is what makes a good layering system. Comfort, versatility. I can adapt to any weather conditions very easily, very quickly. This is also a good example of why I prefer a raincoat as my protective layer over my shell, or this really good REI coat as well. I'll show you this coat because this is a great coat as well. Just sometimes it's more than I need, because I allow, with these different layers, I can get the functionality of this coat, and really in the end all I need is the water protection from the elements layer, which I can get from any $35 cheap raincoat. And I've had many raincoats, expensive raincoats, and what I'll say is, in my opinion, go with the lower end one that you will replace every several years. Even though I've had this one about 5 or 6 years, you can spend $200 on a raincoat and it only lasts you 2 years, where I find you can get the same functionality and save yourself a couple of bucks if you just go with one that you can find at Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops. It starts to rain. I grab my protective outer layer, and you can see, even with 1, 2, 3, 4, this is the 5th layer that I'm now putting on. You can see it does not reduce my mobility. It is extremely comfortable. In fact, I can't even tell if I didn't have to zipper everything one of these up. I couldn't even tell that I had 5 layers on. It feels almost lighter and more comfortable than a lot of my ski coats that I've worn in the past. And this gives me the adaptability and the versatility at many different temperatures and weather conditions, where I can mix and match to fit my exact needs for that moment. All right, since I'm talking about outer layers, let's just go through these quickly, because I do love these outer layers. I just use them a little bit less frequently. This is primarily my ski coat, and this coat is extremely warm and has awesome hood and awesome features. But what I find is that it's a little bit more than what I need. Now, if I'm gonna be out on a day when I know it's going to be snowing all day, it's gonna be primarily wetness is something that I want to prevent, then this will be my primary outer layer. I might even bring my raincoat also. just so I can switch them off and on in case I need them. But basically, this is primarily my ski coat. This is a outer shell. This would go over all those layers that I previously wore, and it's still very comfortable. It has Velcro straps. You can cinch it up really tight and nice in windy conditions. So if I know it's going to be pretty bad weather and water is going to be my primary concern all day, then this layer is definitely in my backpack. All right, I want to quickly go over this layer also, because this is one of my favorites as well, depending upon exactly what I'm going to be getting myself into. But this is basically an insulated raincoat with a hood, which is another nice feature to this. This is an REI Gortex jacket, and it's, as I mentioned, it's completely waterproof. It has a nice hood. And the other nice feature about this coat is that it has armpit zips, right? So this is a nice feature that allows you to vent heat without allowing water to get in your coat. So a lot of times, maybe if I'm winter hiking and I'm on the narrow trail walking in between, and the sun has been beaten down on those trees and they're all wet, I'll wear something like this that'll keep that water off of me while I can vent out any extra heat that I'm getting from wearing this layer. Some other ancillary components to my layering system that you may not think of right off the bat, but sun protection, UV protection. I love these outdoor research runner's caps. They have these shades that you attach to the cap. When I'm paddling and I want to keep the sun off my neck, or maybe on a hot summer day and I know I'm going to be on a treeless peak for a good portion of the time, or I want to have some lunch up there and not have the sun beating on me, a runner's cap works really well. Buffs around my neck, buffs on my forehead, they help keep the sweat, regulate my sweat. A buff can do a lot of things. I always have a buff or some sort of neck gaiter depending upon exact temperature. A face mask or balaclava, goggles, sunglasses are all part of my layering system, as I mentioned as well. Gloves. I love mechanics gloves for outdoor activities. I have the dexterity to get to all my zippers. I can do almost everything I need to do with a set of mechanics gloves. They provide enough insulation to keep me warm, usually in very cold conditions also, as long as I'm moving. One thing I do suggest is getting some waterproof over mitt also. Sometimes I'll wear just my waterproof over mitts as I'm descending, or maybe if I'm getting my hands wet, it's a little cold and I just want to keep them dry. I also have a little bit heavier work glove that I'll bring occasionally. In the Adirondacks, a lot of times you're using trees as you are descending a mountain, and they have those little tiny stubby branches that have been broken off, and when you stick your hand on them, I'll tell you, it doesn't feel very good. So having some protection for your hands, not only for temperature, but also as you descend. I like to use my hands. I like to use a third point of contact. I'll have 2 feet in a hand a lot of times. It makes me feel more secure. Gaiters. Gaiters, I love my gaiters. I start wearing my gaiters as soon as it starts to cool off a little bit. I keep the bottom of my pants much drier. There's less wind that comes up my pants, and I stay much warmer with my gaiters. All right, guys, I hope this video gave you something. As you can see, a layering system is an important aspect to keeping yourself safe and happy as you traverse through the Adirondacks. Regulating your temperature and keeping the elements from getting on your clothes are the most important characteristics of a good layering system. You have to use it properly, or else you could have the best stuff in your backpack, but if you don't know how and when to utilize them and combine them in ways where your temperature always stays at a comfortably cool level, then your layering system is not being utilized properly, and you should rethink it. Okay, that wraps up the layer system edition of Gear Closet. As always, guys, thanks so much for watching Adirondack Adventures. When you enjoy the content, please remember to give me a thumbs up. And stay tuned, because there's a lot more coming.